the Curated Caregiver, and I am Donna Jackson, the Adult Caregivers Coach. We have been delving deep into caregiving across the ages, throughout the ages. So for every stage of life that we're in, we've been talking with my guest, Misty Piekaar McWilliams. And my goodness, she has been educating us, giving us real time and real life stories from what she deals with every single day. One of the things that we'll be talking about today is we will be addressing similar content from a younger person's perspective. And then we'll end where we end, Misty, because we just go with the flow. So take us back into your world. And let's do it.
So thanks, Donna. I appreciate that introduction. And so I want people to realize that caregiving can be a very, hard task as far as you can feel overwhelmed. And don't feel that way. You need to realize that everyone's going to need care at some point in time. And more than likely, you're probably going to be a caregiver at some point in time. So a lot of people think, well, I'm in my 60s, I've got aging parents, or maybe I'm a spouse and I'll be taking care of my loved one. But what about this? Does anyone know anyone, and this may be you, you've decided where you grew up is not the place for you, and there is no place to work where you're living. So you move to a big town or a big city. You don't have a lot of support infrastructure, don't have a lot of relations built up yet. And so you're just going to work, coming home, maybe to an apartment, a townhome, a house, and then you're going back to work, and you're really just kind of to yourself. Well, what happens if you have an accident? Or in the case of someone that I know, specifically my husband a few years ago, before I met him, what happens if you have a kidney stone? Something small that can happen, right? And you need some assistance. So this can happen to anyone. And what you need to know is that sometimes caregiving can be a short period of time. So caregiving can be just a few days. But if you're not able to do anything, as in you can't get up from the bed, maybe you've had like a surgery or something and you're required to be bedridden for 3 days, then guess what? Caregiving and, taking care, giving care, that's going to be a part of your world. So it's just something to think about that I think everyone needs to think about. The other thing, Donna, is, and this is dear to my heart, I'm a parent of small kids, and I've shared that multiple times. But if I go down, guess what? So do the people that depend on me, my small kids. They're not going to be able to get to school. They're not going to be able to get to preschool. They're not going to be able to get to their curricular activities or extracurricular activities. And so what happens there? Who's running the lunches around? Who's running, as I call them, my little rugrats around? And so it's important to realize that, it could be anyone at any point in time that needs care. So Donna, my question to you is, when you think about caregiving, what pops in your head? Do you think of younger people or older people?
Yeah. So we talked about this, that the initial thought is that this is happening to you older in life. As you're approaching or are in retirement mode, full retirement, semi-retirement, then it seems like these thoughts start to kind of come into more of a reality, more of a, oh my gosh, I need to deal with this now.
Right. And I would agree with that. I think retirement, pre-retirement, we start thinking about long-term caregiving. But I would say that if you're listening and you are younger, or you say, I'm far away from retirement, think about a short-term caregiving plan. Because typically that's what happens, is that you're basically out for a week or two, but you need the support of someone. But But you're right, Donna. Prepping, whether it be in your 60s and 70s, and that's what a lot of people think about, it can go a long way. And so we had talked about this before, and I just want to go back to this. And it's the fact that when you're older, one thing you need to realize, especially if you're married, is that you're going to go from, at one point in time, from 2 incomes to 1 income. So what does your future look like? And most people will take and put off what physically that means. But if you're in your 60s and you have a 3-story house, you just need to make sure either, number one, you downsize to a 1-story house, or if you want to retain and stay there, that your living space is on the first floor and that it's feasible. And I know that a lot of people say, well, I'll get to that when I want to, but we got to think about it in real terms. We're in a housing crisis, right? So you may 3-4 years from now want to go buy that 1-story house. But I don't know about you, Donna. For me personally, there's just nothing out there. So that's something you need to think about. You need to be very realistic.
Yeah.
So,
Misty, you point to something that I do with my in my coaching programs. And one of the things that it's really important for me to convey, and the folks that take my coaching, they are at a point in their caregiving journey that they've tried to do things the way either they've seen it done, they thought it should be done, conventional wisdom, all of the things, Dr. Google, all of the things. And it's quite painful. And, trying to approach this time of life and you are not prepared, it is just painful. That's the word that it's a time of suffering for everyone. And like you said, it's not just you, and it's not just the person you're caring for, that elderly loved one. It's the entire ecosystem around you who, whether they're actively participating, or they're just, Monday night quarterbacking of what you should have done and all of the things. When you're not prepared, it makes this season exponentially more difficult. And so, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, you're right. So 2 things you said, Donna, that just kind of popped in my head. And that is this whole notion of ecosystem. So one thing that I tell clients who come to me is, if you are a person who is giving care at this point in time, the first person in your family who's going to tell you what you're doing wrong is the person who has no skin in the game. As in, I would do it this way. Well, of course you would, because you're not doing the meds. You're not doing the daily baths. You're not dressing them. You're not agitated just by the small functions that they do. But they're going to be the first one to give you advice. And then the other thing is, and this is part 1B, I can talk about caregiving all day long, is what works today is not going to work tomorrow. So don't get frustrated with yourself. I tell everybody, if caregiving was so simple, there'd be a book for dummies about it, and there's not, right?
Yeah.
And as a result, it is difficult. And I think about personally, and I've had clients who tell me this, but I also just think personally of a story where my grandmother was in an adult care home, and her sister, who really would just come in on a monthly basis and buy this and that, she would agitate her. And she would tell me and my mother, who were the caregivers, everything that we could do better. But, she wasn't coming in every day. She was coming in once a month. She was agitating my grandmother, who was there as a patient. She really made all the staff mad because she would tell them what they could do better about their jobs. And it literally would take us 3 to 4 days to resolve the situation for a lady who stood no more than 3 to 4 hours. And I'm sure a lot of caregivers can say, I'm in that situation. I have a family member or a friend who's always telling me, well, if you just did it this way, it'd be so much better. And so one thing I will tell people is if they say that, turn it back to them and say, well, I don't know if that person will permit me to do it. Why don't you help me with this? And
Mm.
literally, you'll see how much less advice they'll start giving. If they realize how big of a fight it is to put a pair of pants on someone in order to go to the doctor, and realize that it can be literally like two alligators wrestling in a swamp, then I promise you, they're going to stop giving you so much advice. So one thing I will say is don't take it hard if you're the caregiver, because you're going to get a lot of unsolicited advice. But planning, you are so right there, Donna. So with planning, people need to know, if you plan, especially from a legal standpoint, it's going to be a few $100s, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 for everything. On the flip side, legally, if you don't plan, you're looking at thousands and thousands and thousands. So one of the things that everyone can do, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, is number one, make sure you have a list of your assets and people you deal with. So they're business cards. Do you go to Wells Fargo? Do you go to First Citizens? Do you go to Navy Federal? And make sure your people know where those documents are located. Because if you're giving care and something happens to you, not only is one person down, but now two people are down. So make sure you have those documents and people know where they're at. And then for many people, they do take and put designations on financial accounts. And so when you put a designation on a financial account, typically what that means is at your death, it goes to someone. So it does not mean as a beneficiary designation, if I'm 60, that they get that income right now. That's what a power of attorney is. They would have access to that. A designation, a beneficiary designation, is your death. So a death certificate is submitted, and then in return, they get that income, right? And it's really important that you always update your beneficiaries on any financial account. It can be a checking account. It can be a savings account. It can be a retirement account like a 401k, a 457, 403. It can be an IRA. It can be a Roth account. But that is very beneficial if there's a birth in your family, a wedding in your family, a death in your family, a divorce in your family, or if someone gets disabled. And this may be something that's happened to someone is, you and your spouse went to work and unfortunately someone got injured. And so they're disabled. Well, each state's different. Each situation is different. But you would not want them to get all this income at one time from your checking or your savings if they may be on a government benefit program. And so you need to check into that. So just be aware, if any of that stuff happens, birth, wedding, divorce, death, disability, check and see who your beneficiaries are. And lots of times you may need to seek professional assistance, like an attorney, to say, okay, you'd be fine, or no, you're not. But what you don't want to happen is you don't want the ex-spouse to get everything. And I know of a case, a personal case, in which someone did not update their beneficiaries. And what occurred was the ex-spouse got everything. Funeral home said, who's going to bury this man? The current spouse, who was the widowed spouse, says, well, I didn't get anything. I'm sure it's not going to bury the man. And the ex-spouse said, well, I'm not going to bury the man because he cheated on me with the widow. So let her pay for it. So just be aware, it's important to update those things. Now, Donna, my understanding is that you also had a situation recently that you're aware of in which things weren't updated. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. Oh my gosh, Misty, so much there. But yes, let me answer that question first, and then I want to go back. Several things you mentioned. Yeah, so just an unfortunate situation in my own family, right? And one of the reasons we want to bring this content and these particular experts that I bring to you each month is because this is real life. It's happening to all of us, right? We're all being impacted in some way, shape, or form by not being prepared in this specific space. And so, yeah, in my family, the long and short of it is that just what you mentioned, beneficiaries and emergency contacts were not updated, right? Because we're talking about someone who's young, who's not even, anywhere near um, retirement age and things like that. Uh, don't have children who, that's kind of the first time usually in a young person's life where it's like, okay, I got to get really responsible and I have to do some things because I have a legacy now. And so perhaps it was because no children, there are no children involved. However, like something can happen at any point in life and render us, unable to care for ourselves or communicate our wishes, right? So the question that I have as a result of this experience is, what types of documents, if the person who is listed as the emergency contact or the beneficiary has passed and these names haven't been updated? First question is, how difficult is it to prove kinship for anybody else in that family? And then let's lay on top of that that there is an adoption situation so that the person is not a blood relative, but an adopted sibling. How difficult is it? And are there documents that can help,
Right. So,
make that identification possible?
right. So I'm going to answer this question in three different ways, or with three different pieces of advice. So the first is what I just said. It goes back to WAD, as I said, the birth, wedding, divorce, death, disability. Anytime that happens, you need to take and make sure that you're looking at your documents, whether it be a healthcare power of attorney, a living will, a trust, or a general power of attorney, or whatever you may have to see, does something need to be changed or tweaked? Now, the document, a healthcare power of attorney, and this is applicable to all states in the U.S., that tells you basically who your ICE is, who, in case of an emergency, who would be the person who could make those decisions for you. And so lots of times a really thorough healthcare power of attorney, and I always do this for my clients, is there won't be just one backup, but there'll be two more. And my thought process is this. If you're someone who's 60 and you're married to someone who's 60, right? You're automatically going to say, oh, my spouse. But if you're both 90 and you just list one child, so you only have one backup, well, if they're transporting you somewhere, you're very vulnerable. So always on your healthcare powers of attorney, your financial powers of attorneys, your wills, your trust, try to list three people. Okay. If the healthcare power of attorney, you're just not ready to take and do that document, or you're not wanting to do that document, or let's say the person that you would think would be good is not a good person now. So person moves into, Raleigh, North Carolina. They just moved here. They're starting to make acquaintances, but they don't feel comfortable listing someone, and their family's not suitable for them. Then what most people need to know is in your medical record. So if you go to a larger hospital or a larger known medical provider, there's actually a space for you to enter documentation. Is it as binding or is it as legal as a healthcare power of attorney? No. But in your case, Donna, which you mentioned, I would say that's a good way to start, is just put in your medical record, in your e-chart, if you will, in
Mm.
case of an emergency, this is who you need to reach out to, okay? And the benefit is, in our global network, it doesn't have to be someone local. So if you are, let's say, a Chinese exchange student and you're 22 years old, then this is applicable to you. And you may think, how can caregiving be applicable to me? It's applicable to everyone. Now, I answered when, and I answered the documents. So let me now third answer, how do you establish kinship? You establish kinship by those official documents that are given out. So, is it a child of yours? It'd be a birth certificate. Adoption, Donna, you mentioned that. So that would be an adoption order from a court. Just be aware, though, with adoption and like half siblings and step siblings, that if you have no will or trust, that if something goes with, like if you pass away and something goes with a will or without a will or trust, that some states do recognize adoption as being, of the family, and some don't. Same thing with step siblings, same thing with half siblings. So if you come from a blended family, you may want to really think about wills and trust, because it differs state line to state line. The other thing is, people will say, well, how do you establish, for example, that I was married to a person? Marriage certificate. And then sometimes a death certificate is very beneficial as well, because it will show who was living there. So I had a case maybe 2 years ago in which the gentleman had no family. He passed away, but I'm not sure if you know this, Donna, or not, but on a death certificate, it'll say who was the informant to let people know that this person passed away. And then it'll list their location. And as a result, that was because this individual had no ties and nothing, right? This established that this person was living there. So the documents that you need to look at are those official government documents that are given throughout the course of your lifetime when major life events happen: marriage, death, birth, adoption, and so forth.
Yeah. Oh, Misty, thank you. I have a feeling that people who actually have their files in order and can locate these documents that you're talking about are, way ahead of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want to talk to the people who they're just kind of living by, the seat of their pants. They're just flying in the wind. And so this is an after the fact. And I know this is a hard question because I don't even know where I would look. But after the fact, the scenario is none of this is in place. None of it. Or the documents that would have been in place for those life events are nowhere to be found. So now, how do you establish kinship? Literally, that you can even identify the body. Like, how would you do that? How would you go about doing that?
Yeah. So as far as body identification, so who is this actual body? That's state specific. And what I will tell you is that this brings back an example of my mother worked in a nursing home for 52 years as a certified nursing assistant.
Mhm.
And this individual had passed. And the director of nursing said, well, we have no family for this person. What do we do? I mean, what happens? Well, in the state of North Carolina, the chief medical examiner is the person who has jurisdiction over bodies. So it is literally upon the state to determine what to do with the body. And they probably waited a certain period of time, and then they decided to reach out to family if they could. And if there was no, paths to take, then I'm not certain what they did, to be honest with you. But I assume they waited a certain period of time and then tried to give, a proper arrangements for the body.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if there's nothing, what I will say is this, is that a lot of people will say, well, there's some database somewhere, or there's got to be some, like, if someone passes away, like, this is where all their stuff will be kept in this big old database. That does not exist. So a
Mm,
lot of people will be really surprised to say, well, here, so you have the will or you have the trust. But if people don't know what's in it or what even you own, it's not like there's some government entity that keeps up with what you own and how you own it. There is none. So what'll happen is, and a lot of people may shake their head and say, yeah, I know about this. I've heard about this. Your state will have what's called unclaimed cash or unclaimed stuff. And this is literally insurance companies and or companies who they received more money or they realize the person's deceased and they just give it back to the state. But there's no one that notifies you of that. I know in North Carolina, the treasurer is trying to do a better job to say, hey, something happened. Would you be the person who is the direct kin of this person? And if so, there's money laying here. But it's
right.
not like there's this big system where you can just Google everything and say, well, John Smith or Misty Piekaar McWilliams owned this, this, and this. It's really just a matter of hunting it down. So I think it just drives the fact, Donna, that you've really got to take and do stuff. Now, if it's after the fact and you're the family member, so,
Hmm.
I'm distinguishing between the person who's listening to us now, who says, well, I have nothing. Well, the time to do something is now, versus the person who says, I'm good, but I inherited this huge old mess. What do I do? I inherited, a problem where my mother didn't plan anything. She hates me. I'm having to, not work as many hours, or even maybe an inheritance, and it's a big old mess because someone passed away, and you're like, where do I even turn? Okay. I would say one thing, and I will say I'm biased, but I definitely say this. If you have the ability, try to get legal professionals involved on the front end, so an attorney versus the back end, because lots of times people will make an issue bigger than it is because they just don't know. But as far as just where to go for this information, um, if you have no income, there are typically what are called statutory forms. And what that means is there's a statutory healthcare power of attorney, a statutory financial power of attorney. It means that the legislature in your state literally said, this is what a template would look like if it's a healthcare power of attorney. So go to try and find those documents so you can start planning. And then if you're on the other side and you're trying to resolve an issue and that person didn't do any planning, it really is just seeking advice, because if you don't know where to turn, you're probably going to go down the wrong path, and it's just going to lead to more money, more issues. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Believe us that this is a hard season to be in, but we can do hard things. We have done hard things, and it's a choice. You do it on the hard thing on the front end, or you do the super hard thing on the back end, because now you're under an avalanche of emotions, legal documents, or proceedings that you have no idea where to start and how to address it. So let me just make sure that I close the loop on this. So if a person shows up, or can just a random person show up with no documentation to that medical, the coroner's office or wherever the body is, and say, this is my stepbrother, this is my cousin, I am next of kin, and I have no documentation to prove that. Will they be able to do anything on that person's behalf?
well, it's state specific, but in North Carolina, they're going to have to prove kinship. So they're going to have to prove, and I don't know off the top of my head the statute, but there is a statute out there for the chief medical examiner in which documentation they can take, what they can't take. And
Mhm.
then from an inheritance standpoint, because People do think about that as well. They will have to show their kinship. So they will have to have those official documents. They can't just claim per se. They may claim, but then of course you always have the right to contest it, right? So you can say, no, this is not the case. In which case, in the state of North Carolina, you just submit a document to the clerk saying, hey, a case was opened for the distribution of assets for this person. And this person says they're X, Y, and Z. We have no evidence of such, and as such, we do not approve this. So it can get nasty, which is why I say it's kind of important to take and involve professionals. And Donna, you mentioned hard. So I've done caregiving and talking through caregiving lots and lots and lots of times. And there's two examples that I've talked through with couples or individuals, and I think it's the hardest ever. And that is a married couple who has a child with a disability, and they don't know what's going to happen to that child when they pass away. So someone who, for all practical purposes has been on Medicaid, and they know that this child's going to need a lot of caregiving. And so I would say really rely upon your support, your networks, and, who do you know? There are groups out there like the ARC, like Medicaid, that can be of assistance, but really dig in to say, okay, what can I do? And then the other is the individual who's never been married, or maybe they've been married and they never had kids, but they don't know what's going to happen when they're 80 or 85 because they don't have the infrastructure underneath them. And so it's really important to have those hard conversations with yourself about what's going to happen. And it makes me think about this couple that I spoke to recently, and they did not have any children. And so their thought was, and this is truly, a thought everyone has, which is, okay, the first one passes away, right? But they're the caregiver until that first spouse passes away. But then my question to both of them was, okay, so one of you is left and you start falling. What happens? If you don't have children, nieces, or nephews that you can depend upon, what happens? And in this situation, they did have nieces and nephews, but they were literally across the globe. So they just would not have been, able to provide any assistance. So have those hard conversations if you fall in one of those two groups where you may have a child with special needs or you have, no children. What's going to happen? Because the answer given to me, and this is given to me lots of times, is, when that person dies, I'm just going to die too. Well, good luck. That's called murder, okay? So it doesn't happen that way. And you really need to be legitimately thinking about, what are you doing? What's happening, right? What is it really going to look like for you? So I just want to throw that out, Donna, because I don't think people do themselves justice in thinking, oh, well, I'll just take and be independent the rest of my life. No, it's not going to happen. You know?
Yeah. It's something. Misty, thank you for, circling back to that because, and especially more and more in society, we have, people who are really becoming, or we're learning about more and more recluses, people who are just staying to themselves. They're loners. The world seems very scary, and so they're just like, it might be just safe if I just stay to myself. And there's a double-edged sword there, right? And I wanted to just circle back to a couple of things really quickly before we go to our next, topic, which is, you mentioned, we talked about how we can easily tell somebody who is in the throes of caring for an elderly person that, don't get overwhelmed, don't get stressed. And like you mentioned, there's always that person who's telling you what to do, and they're not under the weight of what you're under, right? So they have this, very clear thinking, and it's very idealistic. They don't know what you know. And to your point, there are a gazillion different factors that are happening, right? So you're trying to dress your loved one, and they're fighting you, right? So the person who's giving you the advice, they're not anticipating that you're getting slapped around in the face and head while you're trying to help them. They're just thinking, oh, it's just like a little baby. What are you kidding me? Let me just put how hard could that be? They have no idea. And so one of the things that like we say is, try not to get overwhelmed, try not to be frustrated and things like that. And one, I tell my folks, the folks that come to my community, and we talk about just all of what we're talking about right here. And they can even come and ask questions about what we've talked about, right? But in addition to that, in my coaching program, I actually walk them through and coach them on how to not become frustrated. Because it's real easy to say, don't be frustrated, don't be overwhelmed. And it's like, yeah, how do I not do that? When all of this is coming at me, I have a day job, I'm raising children, and now I have to care for my elderly loved one. So I actually help them to navigate how to do that, which is huge. I just wanted to draw that distinction because a lot of people are at their wits' end. They're burnt out, and it's because they've not been doing this thing the right way. They've been making all of the classic mistakes, and so I want to help them in that space. The next thing is, you talked about how we can practically start preparing for this, and it's as simple, you all, as having an envelope, a big, one of those big vanilla envelopes, and you write on it, important papers, or however you want to determine it is. And as you come across them, as you're just, doing things around the house, or if things are coming in the mail, just make that connection. Oh, I need to set this aside. This is an important document for not only myself, but someone who might need to come in here and take care of my affairs, right? So just start assembling that, much like we do for our taxes each year, right? As soon as that first letter comes for your taxes, this is my new tax bundle that I have to set aside for this year. Same concept. And you said something that was huge, and I want to make sure we touch on it before we end. You talked about setting up trusts and beneficiaries, and how we need to not only just put their name on it, on an account that you might have, or in some investment, or whatever that looks like, financial, that it looks like, but that you designate how this disbursement is given. Because if it goes out all in one lump sum upon your death, it may very well jeopardize the beneficiary's status as receiving Social Security, or if they're receiving any sort of Medicaid or Medicare benefits. That was huge. And you, Misty, you just, glazed over it.
Yeah. Well,
You know so much stuff that this is just easy for you, but that jumped out at me.
Let me just say this, though. It would not affect Medicare benefits. It would affect Medicaid benefits.
Okay.
And then it would not affect disability benefits if you're SSDI. It would only jeopardize SSI, which is supplemental security income. So it would affect disability if you're SSI. And you're right, there's a lot of distinctions. I just want to throw that out there, Donna, that people do need, and you bring up a very valid point. Do not think as a caregiver that if you're giving care and something happens to you, you really need to think and talk to a professional before you just give the money outright to the person you're giving care to, because it could jeopardize what any type of benefits they would receive.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Listen, once again, this has been chock full of information. And And as you know, in this space, there's so much going on. And even as we are trying to help and educate and just inform our caregivers about this valuable information, we too we don't want to overwhelm them with it. So we try to just break it up in consumable chunks, right? So Misty, tell the folks how they can contact you. You have been an amazing resource for here in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. Uh, let folks know how they can contact you directly for more of what you have.
Yeah, sure, Donna. So I do want to say that something that I'm working on that I think may be of value of people is, we're more transient, we're more global. And so in North Carolina, there's this big push and reform towards electronic wills, electronic and digital data. So I'm going to put out there just a little plug that if you already have documents and they don't address all the digital stuff we have, it could be photos, it could be crypto, right? It could be anything. Then definitely look at your documents. On the other hand, if you have nothing, now's the time to start. And so if you are interested in addressing that, and be aware, there's going to be a day and time where you're going to be able to do a will on a Kindle. And it's fast coming, just so you know, or a power of attorney, as in like in the next 2 to 3 years, not as in the next decade or so. Then give me a call. It's 919-747-8795. Again, 919-747-8795. And that's something that's dear to my heart because it's just so fast and it's changing so quickly. So in North Carolina, e-notaries are coming out. The idea of electronic wills are coming out. The idea of electronic signatures are coming out. So, what does that even mean? Like, is everybody just going to have a DocuSign signature now? So if that's something that you're like, well, good point. I do work in cryptocurrency and I need to know a little bit about how that works. Then definitely reach out to me. Thanks, Donna.
Misty, that was hot off the presses, because what they don't know is you and I have been talking about this very project for over a year now. Oh, I'm so excited. Okay, I'll have to call you. Anyway, thank you so much. And we are looking forward to seeing you in another episode. You have so much to offer, and we just thank you for it.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.